Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at AI Expo Africa 2020. I am Karim Beguir, and today we're going to be discussing deep tech innovation in Africa as part of the innovation track. So to introduce myself, I am the co-founder and CEO of InstaDeep, a leading African AI startup, which is focused on problems in decision-making AI. I am also a Google machine learning developer expert and a member of Deep Learning Indaba's steering committee. So today, as discussed, we're gonna take a deep plunge into looking at what is happening in deep tech and how, in particular, it's possible to innovate in Africa. So if we look at the summary of the presentation today, we're gonna be first discussing why deep tech innovation is a must. This is something which is absolutely necessary for our continent and for our future. We'll also discuss the particular strength of the African ecosystem when it comes to innovation and the potential for deep tech innovation. We'll discuss how this innovation can be driven, like what are the fundamental drivers of this deep tech innovation in Africa, the boosters, and sort of giving you a general sense of what to expect in the future. So to deep dive into it immediately, like why is deep tech innovation a must in Africa? I mean, if you look at deep tech in the age of AI, I like to see AI as sort of like the center of the deep tech universe in this time and day. AI and innovation in AI basically impacts everything: mobility, robotics, hardware and IoT, energy, chemistry, biotech. So one can see AI as sort of like this general purpose technology, which is gonna really help, push deep tech innovation in all fields. And this is particularly important. We're living at an age where, disruption is happening all the time. And a lot of this disruption is actually powered by AI. And so AI is definitely central to innovation. And this is something which is really accelerating at the moment. The impact of AI on the economy is already a fact. If you look at, what we see and what we expect for the future, you already have like billions, like billion-dollar industries, if not trillion-dollar industries, which have AI at their core. Think about like self-driving cars, for example. And if you look at the impact of AI by 2030, it's as big as $15 trillion. A way to look at it is basically the GDP of India and China combined. And interestingly, like when you look at the map, you see that Africa is pretty much not there when seen from from a global perspective. And for me, this was sort of my calls to arms. Like this was like the moment when I decided, hey, this is actually quite important to do a deep dive into AI, into deep tech in Africa, and change the status quo. It cannot be that Africa is left over when the world is innovating and like certain countries and such as China are growing extremely fast and have been able to harness the power of modern technology. We got to be able to do something about it. And that's been driving a lot of my personal choices when it came to co-founding InstaDeep and other. But, if we were to summarize where AI is today, it's definitely having a massive impact, and it's basically pushing innovation in all deep tech sectors. So, that sounds like very compelling because, Africa needs to be, as part of the future and not part of the past. So we need to find, our seat there when it comes to innovation and AI. It's actually even more important when you think about that. Actually, AI is a triple exponential. This is basically something which is moving extremely fast. And because it's moving extremely fast, it creates opportunities. It's not something set in stone. And the current ranking in terms of development and human development of countries is definitely not something set in stone. And for us Africans, this is actually a great opportunity, and you need to make the best of it. And it's an opportunity because AI is disrupting things extremely quickly. So, and the reason for that is that AI is a triple exponential. basically data, hardware, and improvements in AI algorithms are all happening at the same time at an incredibly fast pace. And this is changing everything. So if we look at data, for example, like this is an example, basically like the number of autopilot miles, which have been recorded by Tesla in the automotive sectors. So we're gonna be nearing 5 billion miles of recorded miles driven by autopilot, and you can see here the exponential growth of data that we are seeing. So this is a good example, if you want, of data growing exponentially, and this is quite important because historically, when you look at progress been basically synonymous with obtaining data sets. It's not at the point where one specific algorithm gets introduced that things get interesting. It's more when like large data sets become available. So if you look, for example, at what happened with vision, it's not when ConvNets were invented that we suddenly had like great vision systems. It's actually when we had a large data set, the ImageNet data set in 2010, which was organized and allowed basically this large repository of photos, like 1.5 million pictures. This really developed not only vision in general, AI vision, but the whole field of deep learning, and was transformational. There were other examples in the past with IBM Jeopardy and the fact that we got a significant amount of data for that particular game, or statistical translation before it. But we can also use this sort of paradigm to look forward to the future. So if you look at something like a modern problem, this would be, for example, like 3D video scene estimation, on which there's been a lot of progress over the last few years, notably since 2017. And as I mentioned in the slide before, we are now at 5 billion miles driven in automotive, and or we'll be nearing that number towards end of the year or early 2021. So the question is really like, when is self-driving going to become a reality? And this is a deep tech innovation which is literally worth probably $1 trillion in terms of like market and like revolution in mobility. So this gives you a sense of the fact that we have data sets growing exponentially creates compelling opportunities in deep tech innovation, in this case, self-driving. And of course, it's not just the data which is growing exponentially. Famously, we all know about Moore's law, the concept that basically compute power doubles every 2 years or so, and it's been the case for many, many years. There are some doubts whether it's going to continue on its current form, but if it's not on its current form, it could be with quantum machine learning, for example, or other forms. What is sure is that hardware computation has been becoming exponentially better and cheaper through time, and this is unlikely to stop. If you look actually at the physics, the fundamental limits of physics, we still have 200 more years of doubling ahead of us. So there's still time to invent new technologies and keep moving on that exponential curve. So if you look at what we're talking here, we said basically that AI is a triple exponential, basically exponential growth in data, exponential growth in hardware, but we also have exponential growth into the quality of the algorithms that power AI. And this is maybe less intuitive, but this is a recent analysis that was published by OpenAI, which basically proves that efficiency of AI algorithms actually improves and doubles every 16 months. So if you look, for example, at an AI vision system such as AlexNet, which was revolutionary in 2012, today in 2020 we have with same performance with 44x times less compute. That's quite remarkable. So this is basically like a doubling in efficiency every 16 months. So on one side, you have exponentially more data, exponentially more compute power, but at the same time, the algorithms themselves are exponentially more efficient. So it's not surprising as a consequence that AI as a whole is growing exponentially. And that means that you really like deep tech and deep tech innovation becomes a possibility. It's like everything is in flux, and if you are part of this revolution, if you follow what is happening in AI, if you innovate in AI, crazy possibilities become possible and they like become a reality. And I think this is a message of hope for our continent. It's not because other areas, for example, Silicon Valley or Europe, have been at the forefront of innovation historically, that it's gonna remain the case. We obviously have the example, a recent example of extraordinary innovation coming from China. But that also means that a continent which is vibrant, such as Africa, has real potential when it comes to innovation, and it has real strength that it can bring to the table. And this is basically what we're going to be discussing here. So if we look at things very schematically, and again, this is very like sort of like a order zero type approximation, but if you were to effectively look at who owns the data, who drives AI innovation in the world? Well, a possible way to look at what's going on would be the following. In the US, data and innovation is pretty much centered around the tech giants, Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and others. And that's been the reality, and those companies have grown from strength to strength in any market condition, including the pandemic, where they have been accelerating. In Asia, and notably China, governments are the key driver. Governments have control of data, they have control of AI innovation, and they've been sort of like in many ways replicating the way if in the 50s the US government was actually instrumental into developing what became Silicon Valley, for example, through multiple programs, through the way, for example, where internet came from DARPANET, which was initially a Department of Defense program. And so in the US, tech giants are leading the charge. In Asia, it's mostly governments. And again, these are really like order zero approximation, but it's more like to give you a sense of what's happening. And if you look at Europe, it's really like the individual and, many of them, but importantly, the notion that privacy is important, that's been key into driving innovation. For example, you have technologies such as homomorphic encryption, which ensure privacy while allowing machine learning models to develop. Well, those sort of concerns about privacy are a definite signature of, the European ecosystem, the key focus on preserving privacy and individual human rights. And so that is also a strong driver. But now let's discuss Africa. Like, where is Africa all across this? And the interesting take, and the take I'd like to push in this presentation, is that actually Africa has strengths, and those strengths are startups and communities. Every region in the world has its sort of like unique way of doing things and unique strengths when it comes to data and AI innovation. And I firmly believe that in Africa, it's all about startups and communities. And we will be discussing this a bit more during this presentation. So when it comes to communities, I'll say a few words about Deep Learning Indaba, which I am part of the steering committee. Deep Learning Indaba is a non-profit which aims to strengthen machine learning and AI in Africa, and has been really instrumental in sort of bringing the machine learning community all across Africa together, particularly around research and support programs, into also awarding prizes every year for people who've been notably helpful into building the ecosystem. And sort of like a sort of large community and a hub was created where we've been able to build up also what we call Indaba X national events, moving from 13 events in 2018 to 27 events in 2019. Also a large annual event, which in 2019 last time was in Nairobi in Kenya. But this, like the simple fact that the whole African machine learning community, particularly around research, is actually gathered around the Indaba, creates opportunities and it creates strength. And for me, this is like a uniquely African opportunity. we have bonds, across each other, across the different countries where we're from, and that can be a source of leverage and strength. And I'll discuss this more. When we look at the startup and the AI startup ecosystem, it's been also booming. We've seen now, 75 plus as is presented here, but probably now 100 plus AI startups sort of blossoming all across the continent. And this is super exciting. The key point I want to make here is that this growth is definitely bottoms up. It is happening literally, with bootstraps, with passion and enthusiasm. And this is really refreshing. And it's also a great source of innovation. So the message maybe of this presentation is that deep tech innovation in Africa is actually happening, but it's happening through the community and it's happening through its startups. And this is very different from what you see in other geographic locations. And this is in a many way an opportunity and very refreshing as well. So what do we mean by deep tech innovation? So let me give you actually concrete examples from my personal history and my team. So just maybe a few words about InstaDeep. So InstaDeep is actually a bootstrap. When we're talking about bootstraps, we literally started the project with 2 laptops and $2,000 in Tunis in North Africa back in 2014. And since then, we've been able to build a dream team of talent that's been progressively capable of tackling exciting opportunities. We became a preferred partner to NVIDIA. This is the largest, the highest partner status in terms of working with NVIDIA and developing excellence when it comes to the hardware of machine learning. Likewise, we've been collaborating with Google for startups, been mentoring there. We've been collaborating in research with DeepMind. And recently, InstaDeep was named in the top 100 most promising AI startups in the world by CB Insights. We're very proud to be part of that list. There are actually 2 companies in Africa that are part of that list with also data profits, and this is exciting. But the key thing is, what can we do with this and what can we do in terms of deep tech innovation? So I'll present here very briefly one example of what can be done, which is an application, an innovative application of reinforcement learning. So reinforcement learning, as probably many of you know, is this exciting technology where you learn by trial and error, which have been popularized by Google and DeepMind around the game of chess and Go with AlphaGo and AlphaZero. And at InstaDeep, we've innovated by applying it to concrete problems, such as, for example, printed circuit boards routing. So this is in the field of hardware and IoT. When you look at the way, for example, you draw those electronic connections between components, this is done in case of PCB quite often manually and relying on human expert knowledge and use of heuristics. And Deep PCB, the product that we currently have as a beta at deeppcb.ai, is actually revolutionary because it uses reinforcement learning and it sort of learns by itself to solve those routing problems. The key point I want to make here is this is quite an innovative deep tech product, and it is a world first. So I think it's very refreshing for the world that African startups founded as a bootstrap are capable of innovating and building up a world first. So just to give you an example, like if you take a particular printed circuit board, you need, when you build the connection between the components, to respect many rules, which we call design rules check, to make sure you have actually integrity in your signals processing. This is a complex problem. So if you already placed your components, you see that you need to build all those connections between components, which is non-trivial. And that's what we do with DPCB, and we can do it better than existing tools, that are not using advanced machine learning. So this is a very concrete example of deep tech innovation in action. And for me, this is a message of hope. That means that we African can actually innovate. We can actually get stuff done. And importantly, we can actually compete even with Silicon Valley. When we think about printed circuit boards and designs of building components and routing them on boards, we automatically think of Silicon Valley, while African startups can also do it and can innovate in this field. So that gives you a sense. Now, as I mentioned, deep tech innovation in Africa is also happening thanks to the community. And there is a very exciting concept that I'd like to share with you, this notion of community-driven deep tech innovation. So this is also something quite original that we've been pioneering at Deep Learning Indaba. And a few months ago, we've launched an Indaba Grand Challenge about curing a parasitic disease, which is Leishmaniasis, which is actually creating like thousands of deaths a year and is currently unsolved. So this is also deep tech innovation at its best. How is it possible to cure Leishmaniasis? When you are sort of like a distributed community, like the machine learning community in Africa. So the general idea here is the concept of drug repurposing. There are many, diseases in the world, which we call neglected tropical diseases, NTDs, which nearly affect, 1.5 billion people, including 500 million children. And, that are unsolved just because big pharma groups are focused on other priorities. However, there are lots of medicinal compounds which we are known to be safe that have been designed for other diseases that could potentially work with, those kind of neglected tropical diseases. So the grand challenge is really to connect the dots. And this is an exciting problem because it can be really distributed. When you look at the way life sciences and biology works, it's all about protein and protein complexes and how those interact with chemicals. And there is an abundance of free data, and that creates ideal training ground and experimentation ground by computational means. You don't necessarily need to have a wet lab to get going. And so distributing this problem to the community actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. There are so many existing compounds which are known to be safe. We also know the characteristics of the problem to solve. It's just sort of like a lock and key challenge, finding the right key to unlock, finding the cure to this disease. So that's the opportunity which we are pushing, to cure Leishmaniasis. This is an ongoing challenge. If you're interested, please, check us out at deeplearningindaba.com. All the details to join the challenge, which we are doing with our partner Zindi, another African AI startup. And the interesting point here is that this is completely free. This is open to the community, and that shows you the power of deep tech innovation driven by the community. To get you a sense, this experiment has never been tried before. We've been contacted by the WHO, the World Health Organization, which really congratulated us for this innovative approach to things. And they actually believe this can, get us to potential cures. So this is in many ways a new page which is currently being written. If you're interested in this, please join this effort. But again, this shows you like the potential that the community has when it interacts and it works. We all work together. So we're glad to have the support here of African startups. My startup InstaDeep, of course, is a strong driver of this exciting challenge. Zindi is lending us their platform and know-how. Also super excited to have Data Science Nigeria, Data Science Africa, Black in AI, Alliance for AI, and others part of this exciting opportunity. But again, this is a different way to do deep tech innovation. And I believe this is the signature of deep tech innovation in Africa. It is relying on African startups and the African community. And I believe that if we work together, we can deliver wonderful innovation that ultimately will be impactful in the world. And in this particular case of Leishmaniasis, save potentially thousands of lives every year. So this is, as important and as serious as it can get. Obviously, the solution to deep tech innovation is also through ecosystem boosters. We all know what these are: scientific institutions, startup accelerators, and there are many now. Venture capital for startups. We have more than 250 VCs, which are from Africa and focused on African startups. Tech giant partners, which are very helpful, and see the opportunity to collaborate with the African ecosystem, whether it's communities or startups, as definitely something positive and a win-win. And this is also a part of the solution to accelerate innovation. And obviously governments, we've been able at InstaDeep to collaborate with the Tunisian government and with Google to launch unprecedented initiatives such as AI Hack Tunisia, the largest machine learning hackathon in the history of the region, with 1,000+ persons, like students and AI passionate like practitioners attending. We actually had to take a whole stadium to host the audience, to give you a sense. But that shows you that the ecosystem is vibrant. And so if I were to conclude this short presentation about deep tech innovation in Africa, the key points is that AI is definitely changing the world and will continue to do so, but is central to innovation. And with AI accelerating exponentially, it is literally shaking everything and creating as such amazing opportunities to innovate in deep tech. If things were frozen, it would be very hard to innovate, but that's not the case. Things are in motion and in flux, and that creates an opportunity for Africa to step up its game when it comes to deep tech innovation. And the signature, in my opinion, of deep tech innovation in Africa is a bottoms-up approach that is going to focus on startups and the community. We can literally do wonders if we believe in ourselves, believe in the entrepreneurial spirit of the continent, and the sort of like strong bonds that unite our communities. This is already a reality. I hope I could convince you with a couple of examples here that deep tech innovation is already a fact. But importantly, it can grow much bigger in the future, and the world is changing fast. And my message of hope and wish for the future is to see Africa to continue to innovate, compete and win and to seize the opportunities of tomorrow. So thanks a lot for following this presentation. You have my details here and my Twitter, and I'll be, of course, available at the Speakers Lounge to answer all your questions. So let's catch up there when you're available. Thanks again.